Hi, I'm Cruz Devon, and welcome to This Gay Life. Today's show was suggested by one of our viewers, and which is something I'd like to say. Thanks for the invitation to do a show like this. And if you have any other suggestions, please feel free to give us a call on the number that'll be shown at the end of the show. But I have to say, this is probably a show I really didn't want to do because of my own anxieties about the subject. We're going to be talking about family violence, and the title is It Could Happen. And I guess the real problem is it does happen, and it happens a lot. My guest today is Sandra Patton. She's Executive Director of the Family Violence Center, Inc., and I'd like to introduce her now. Hi, Sandra.
Hi, Cruz.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the center?
Well, first of all, I really want to thank you for inviting me to this show, and want to tell you that as I'm getting older, I'm learning more about diversity and about people. And I was one of those naive people that would make the statement, I've never been around a gay person. I don't know what they're like. And fortunately, I have a wonderful daughter who does lots of neat different things and introduces me to neat different people. And she introduced me to the gay community and to some wonderful gay people that I've gotten to know and realized that they're persons, they're human beings. And I would venture to say that there's a lot of us out there that are working alongside gay people, that are in church with gay people, and we don't know that because they're people first. Mm-hmm. So that's, I thank my daughter for my education. My background is that I did grow up in a violent home, and I was in a violent marriage, and I got my master's degree in guidance and counseling, and have been in this work for about 4 years. We have a long way to go, but I think we're making some progress. The Family Violence Center itself, our primary goal is to protect people and keep them safe. We shelter battered women and children, but we do a lot of other services for any person who is in a violent relationship. We have a 24-hour hotline, we do crisis intervention, court advocacy, we will do individual sessions, case management, things like that. So we're there for anybody in a relationship that's violent.
A lot of different, like, out services?
Yes.
As far as education, do you go out to different places and talk to groups?
Absolutely. We try to get into the schools quite a bit. We go to several civic groups and organizations. We've been to a variety of churches to speak. And we put an annual conference on every year, too, and that's in October. So we'll be having our annual conference October 14th.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Where's that going to be at?
Here in Springfield. And this is a Southwest Region Conference of the Missouri Coalition Against Domestic Violence.
Wow, I didn't even realize that.
Yeah.
But I guess if they want some information on that, they could give you a call.
Sure.
We'll be giving a number out later, and as well as for help, either direction or information. Could you give us a kind of a definition of violence? I mean, every single one of us, we know, we have an idea of what family violence is just because of made-for-TV movies, which do it oh so well and so graphically, and everything is so staged so well. But on the other hand, in reality, we may not have that distinct of a definition for ourselves.
Well, family violence can take a lot of different forms, and the one that people are most familiar with is the physical violence. And the way I would define family violence would be any act that is coercive or threatening, or you're making someone do against their will. And whether that's through coercion or force, it would be violence. There is emotional violence, emotional abuse, which can be very devastating and carries long-lasting effects compared to the physical bruises that heal. The mental, psychological, there's sexual abuse, which is very prevalent. And then in family violence, we also talk about economic violence, and that's keeping the finances away from a person, keeping them dependent upon you. Maybe they have to get an allowance, or they aren't allowed access to the checkbook, so they have no financial resource of their own. And then some environmental violence, and when we talk about that, we're talking about stranding them, keeping them in a location. We had a woman, we've had different women call us, but we had one in particular I can remember that called, and they lived in the cellar of a home that was being built, And when the man left for work, he had the only vehicle. He would also take the phone, and they lived out in the country.
Oh,
And it was only that she finally got a neighbor to take her into a gas station to get to a payphone that she was able to give us a call. But it's, that there is that kind of violence, the isolation.
Oh my goodness. What, as far as like economic, I mean, I know in a lot of homes, one individual of the family will take care of all the finances. And I've seen this a lot, especially in women, but not exclusively, where when they finally do get out on their own, they don't even know how to pay bills.
Right, right. They've not learned that because they've not had the opportunity to work with it. And so that creates an obstacle for them.
They get so dependent on their partner that basically
Right.
they can't do anything.
And oftentimes they don't even know how much money the household has. Or if they're working, they have to turn their checks over. So they don't know what bills they have, what finances they have. They may not even be allowed to go grocery shopping, or they may be given a certain amount of money that they can go get groceries with. So yeah, they're really kept very much in the dark about finances.
Is it usually like a control issue? Or, I mean, violence, when people talk about violence, I mean, everybody, they have this picture of this woman with stringy hair and dark bruised eyes and a big lump on her lip, and she's probably from a lower income home, and her husband drinks like crazy. And I mean, this is like the stereotypical.
Mm-hmm.
But is that real?
That's only a small percentage of people who are victims of family violence. Crosses all socioeconomic barriers. Family violence is really a relationship violence. It can happen between partners, heterosexual partners, same-sex partners. It can happen in dating relationships. It can even be a sibling violence. But women, and the picture you described, and I know that's what's put out there a lot, but you've got a lot of women who may have their doctor's degree, may have very good positions in the community, they may have financial resources, but because their husband might be an outstanding community member, they couldn't dare tell anybody. Nobody would believe them that this wonderful person could do things like that. And the humiliation and fearful of breaking up the family, just a number of things. I was told a story about one woman who was quite wealthy, and when her husband became abusive, she didn't go to a shelter, she went on a cruise. So it's,
I wish we all could afford that.
Really. But I think that just points out that it happens at all levels.
Does it occur like across, I mean, you said it crosses all barriers. I mean, and the picture I gave, it sounds like it only happens in poor families. And obviously it happens in rich families and white families, ethnic families across the board. When people come in, when women come in and they have an idea of themselves, do they start thinking of themselves as like that stereotypical picture, or is that what keeps them from coming in? I don't look like this, so I'm not being abused?
I think that stereotypical picture stigmatizes battered women, and I think, yes, it does get in the way of other women calling. I know in particular we had a MSW call us and come into shelter. Felt very embarrassed that she was there, that she should have known better. She was educated. She was in
MSW.
I'm sorry, it's a Master's of Social Work.
Ah.
So here's a woman in social work.
Should know about this.
She thought she should know about it, and she was blaming herself for being in the situation. Was not comfortable being there, but did stay and got services, and got into a new life and everything. But I think that's that stigma that comes. It's kind of like we look at battered women the way a lot of people look at homeless people who just won't help themselves or do anything about it.
Blaming the victim.
Blaming the victim, absolutely.
Yeah. And a lot of people say, well, if I was in that situation, I wouldn't do that. But it's really difficult because you're not in that situation.
Right.
And I think one of the things that really, we were talking about self-esteem earlier, and when someone comes in and just kind of helps relieve you of all of your self-esteem, a lot of times you don't make the right decisions.
Right. And I had told you a story about myself having grown up in a violent situation and getting into that kind of relationship. I can remember a point in my life where I didn't know if I had the right to ask my children to wash the dishes after I'd cooked them supper, because I had been told that I was lazy, that I shouldn't make the kids do these things, that I should be up and doing this kind of thing. And not even having the ability to make that simple decision. And it is so subtle But it is so devastating, and this is a lot of what keeps women trapped, or anybody trapped in that kind of a relationship. They have no self-esteem, and it's not because they didn't have self-esteem that they're in the relationship. But once,
Once they get in it.
once they're in there,
It just starts to trickle away.
absolutely, because that's a very good control device, you
Yeah.
know, to take away their self-esteem, to make them dependent upon the perpetrator for any kind of good feelings or any kind of self-worth.
And then they can dole them out as they please.
Absolutely.
And
Whatever
that creates
works
a
best.
really bad situation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's another type of violence that happens in the home, and one thing I really want to talk about is, and I guess a lot of people really don't perceive it as being violence. They perceive it as just being, I don't know, disciplining one's kids. That's violence against kids because of their sexual orientation. And is there any stats on this?
There is some information on that, and the most recent information that I was able to get hold of said that we've heard the ads about how suicide is highest among teens, and it's the number one cause of death next to automobile accidents. The stat that I got on children who are homosexual is that they have a higher suicide risk than any other teen. It's like 1 out of 3, you know, commit suicide. And if you think about that, a lot of that is if they're a teenager in a home and they realize that they're homosexual, they don't have that support system. If their parents are not supportive, who do they go to? Who do they reveal this to where they can get some help? And unfortunately, it seems like too many of them are ending their lives rather than face the rejection.
Well, I don't think there's a lot of help even in schools.
No, I don't think
that's
there
kind
is.
of a hot potato, and they're trying to, and especially with like Hancock 2 around, basically they can't, they feel afraid to intervene in any way, shape, or form.
Right. That is a real dilemma. You know, I think our education systems try to do a good job of being realistic and teaching children the things they need to do to become productive people in our society. Unfortunately, we have people that do target this group, and they try to keep the education out. And I guess I'm one that's always thought, how can education be harmful? You know, and when you educate someone, then you give them the tools and the ability to make their own decisions, their own informed decisions. We certainly need to have resources for children in school. They should be able to go to their counselor. They should know that option's there. They should be able to know that whatever their sexual orientation, they're first of all human beings, and they can be prized for being just themselves.
In whatever shape or form.
Whatever
they may be.
shape or form.
Yeah. One thing about, I think that violence against kids because of their sexual orientation is probably one of the most insidious, because they really have, like you said, no support, and also because they don't have any rights, and the parents are responsible for them. And a lot of times if they disagree with their parents, what I was told in some of the research is that it's very crushing to the child for the simple reason that if a kid gets kicked out of the home because he's done something, like he's ripped off a store or something, that's one thing. But to be kicked out of one's home just because of what you are, which is natural, is extremely damaging to their self-esteem and to the entire build of the child's life.
It's basically saying they have no worth,
Yeah.
no value.
And that in itself is a form of violence. And even though
Right.
people may not recognize that as family violence, I really think that needs to be taken into account.
It does. And I had a friend that sent me information, a brochure on homophobia, and one of the little pieces in there was about a 20-year-old young man who committed suicide, and he was gay, but he had not told anybody. And when they read, his mother went back and read his diaries, he said things like, I hear my parents talking about how much they hate gays, so I know that they hate me because I'm gay. I hear my parents say that it's a sin, so God doesn't love me either. And if I were to tell my friends, they would probably want to beat me up. And this young man saw no alternative but to kill himself. When the mother found this diary, she became very proactive in the gay community, and what she said was his life was not worth this. You know, and was I abusing him by this kind of talk and not realizing that he was struggling with this?
And kids usually do keep it to themselves
Yes.
because they feel so personally like they're maligning their family for being who they are.
Right. And let's face it, victims of hate crime have really been the gay community.
Yeah.
So.
But we don't need a bias crimes ordinance.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry, I had to throw that in. There are some opportunities and some places that one can go, especially if you are a child or underage and in a home, and you need to talk to some people. There are some child abuse hotlines, and you can find almost all of those listed in the yellow pages and the white pages. You can call information and get that number. There's a lot of different resources. Or if you just happen to be watching the show, I have a whole bunch of numbers. There's a bunch of groups that I didn't know were out there. One of them's Kids Peace, and there's just lots of them out there. And if you'd like any of those telephone numbers, we're trying to get as much research put together on that as we can. So, you know, at the end of the show, jot down the number, give me a call, and I'll relay that information to you. I'll send it to you in a blank envelope or whichever's going to be best for you. As far as what else can kids do in this area? Say like we have like a couple of kids watching right now, they're saying, man, I understand that so well. What can I do? I mean, can they call the center? Is there other places they can call?
They can call the Family Violence Center, and we do have a 24-hour hotline, and it is anonymous and it's confidential. And what we can do is talk to them, and you know, hopefully by providing an anonymous confidential line, they can really talk about what's going on, and then maybe direct them to some resources that would be helpful to them. If they need some support, you know, help direct them to support groups or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But we'd certainly try to do our best.
I've been asked a couple of times if there were any support groups in the area. Are there some already pre-built? I mean, obviously, if somebody's an alcoholic, there's AAs. Mm-hmm. Is there already groups for counseling, or would one have to like go to personal counseling for something like that?
You know, I hate to say this, Cruz, but I'm not real sure. I know there's a lot of counselors in the field that say that they work with gay lesbian issues. Mm-hmm. And of course, they would be good. There are some diversity groups mm-hmm. in Springfield, Cohab and Diversity Network. I don't know if they offer any kind of support groups or not. Mm. I think it's something that we've kind of ignored and overlooked for quite some time. And I think there might be other, for instance, my agency or possibly Missouri Victim Center or agencies like that, that if there were a need for that would be willing to do something like that.
Mm-hmm. So if for some reason you feel inclined to go ahead and start putting together a group like this, you could contact them, and that would be really good. Because it starts on a one-to-one basis. It's like somebody gets up in the morning and says, man, I got to do something about this. Yeah. This is like just really wrong.
Right.
And like we're starting a PFLAG, which is good for parents who have gay children or siblings or friends and mm-hmm. maybe don't quite understand the situation and would like help with that. In violence between partners, okay, and this is kind of a subject that's kind of touchy because across the board, what is the possibility of a woman being abused in a home?
Well, our most recent statistics say that 1 out of 2 women will experience violence.
That's one out
of 2. 1 out of 2.
That's not a very good average.
No, it's not.
If I was gambling, I'd say that's not a good gamble.
It's not a good average. U.S. Surgeon General came out, I believe it was 2 years ago, and made the statement that women in America are safer on the city streets than in their own homes. That's a devastating thought. And then, if you take another statistic along with that, where the Judiciary Committee came up with a statistic that 50% of all homeless women and children are fleeing domestic violence. So here you have one authority saying, you know, women are safer on the city streets, and then we've got the fact that, they're out there on the streets. 50% of the homeless women and children.
Maybe that's why they're out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not very good.
No.
Is there any statistics for gay and lesbians as far as you know, the possibility of being in an abusive relationship?
I think we're just now starting to do some statistical work. I brought you that one book that I've been reading, and
yes.
It has some information in there.
This is a book which you got from Random House?
Actually, we ordered that from B. Dalton.
B. Dalton.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if it's in the library yet because I just heard about this, and so we're going to look into that.
And what I've read of that book is they are trying to do some statistics collection, and they're recognizing the problem of battering in gay relationships. This particular book addresses the male relationship only, but in reading it and the descriptions of the violence is so similar to the heterosexual, and it's, we talked about this earlier, it's relationship violence. And statistics they gave was, they said 11 to 20% of gay men in relationships experience violence. But they also said that's a low estimate. And I know that 20 years ago when the battered women's movement started, there were very low estimates. You know, now we know that domestic violence is the #1 unreported crime in America. So you can do some statistical managing, and you can come up with a larger number. But 20% was a conservative figure.
But that's still like maybe 1 in 5.
Yeah,
and that's a
1 in 5.
lot of. That's a lot.
Absolutely, yes.
And there's probably we were talking about it earlier, and there's really no statistics per se about lesbians, and
Right.
usually that's the very last group to have any statistics on it because they don't exist, or at least in the eyes of the public,
Right.
a lot of times they don't.
Yeah.
You were saying that a lot of times when women come into the clinic and they're lesbian, they don't want it known.
Right.
Because not only do they get abuse from the family that they're running from or the place where they're running from, but they can also experience abuse from the other women in the clinic.
Yeah. Well, I think they have fear of being not accepted and segregated, and yes, probably verbally abused. And we try to monitor that, make sure that doesn't happen to anybody that comes into our shelter. But the few that we have had come through have not wanted to tell anybody.
Do you really think that's a realistic thing, or do you think that's just one of the fears that are grown up because of having no self-esteem and going through an abusive relationship?
Well, I guess I think it's both. I think it's realistic. And I also think growing up with a lot of these things. But as a society, we don't accept people that are different from us very much, and we blame them. And maybe that's lack of knowledge and lack of fear. I had related to you an experience when I was going through my counseling training, and I was assigned a lesbian client, and I responded to my supervisor. I said, but I don't know anybody lesbian. I can't do this kind of thing. And she said to me, I love this person. She's very straightforward. She says, what's the matter? Afraid she's going to jump your bones? And, it kind of set me back because I thought, what am I afraid of, really?
Yeah.
And we tend to define gay people by their sexuality. We don't define heterosexuals that way. We're men and women.
Yeah.
But the gay community, they're gay or lesbian, so and I think it's a real education process for people to understand that their sexual orientation is not who they are.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I maybe clear up is that if a gay woman was to call the clinic, and they have this fear that no, I'm not only going to be abused in my home, but I have no other place to go. They can come to the clinic.
They can absolutely come to the clinic, and we're trying to be much more sensitive about how we answer the hotline. For instance, we're learning that when we answer the hotline and we're talking to them, we don't say he. We don't automatically assume that the abuser is a male.
Or that's a heterosexual relationship.
Or that it's right. And try to give them enough feeling of safety and security that they can talk about their situation. If they decide they need to come into our shelter, the only information other women in that shelter have access to is what they feel comfortable in telling them. We don't show their records, they're confidential, and it's a need-to-know basis. Only their crisis manager would have access to it.
So they're really safe?
Yes.
They really are?
They really are safe.
Okay. We've got a few minutes left. We really need to go over some warning signs. Okay, most people will say, well, I'm not getting beat, I'm not getting hit, I can't be in an abusive relationship. What are some of the warning signs?
Okay, that's a good thing to know. Some of the warning signs, I guess number one is extreme jealousy. If they're very jealous, that should send a red flag up. If they're very controlling in that they want to know where you are all the time, if they keep track of your schedule. One of the things I try to tell high school girls is if this guy is coming on really strong and he's saying, I'll pick you up and take you to school and I'll pick you up after school and take you home, that may be very nice and romantic, but is he controlling where you are and when you are by this? Now, he might not be, but check that out.
Yeah.
The other warning sign is if you start giving up things. As I told you earlier, I found myself not even buying the flavor of gum I liked. I was buying his flavor because I was giving up all of my things for him, to please him. The clothes I wore, the programs on television I watched, where I went, who I associated with. Those kinds of things, if you find yourself doing that, then you need to check out the relationship.
I think the number one thing that I've seen across the board in relationships that had a tendency to be abusive was they say it in the same words. It's like, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up.
And I think that should be, if you feel that way, then maybe you should take a time out and say, hey, wait a minute, what's really going on here? What am I really doing? What's going on? What's the power structure like here?
Absolutely. If you're in that situation, if you're walking on eggshells, something's wrong.
And it may not necessarily be like something's really, really wrong. Maybe you're just starting to give up your power.
It could be.
But like talking before, once you start giving up your self-esteem, basically it starts to go faster and faster, and then one day you wake up and you realize, who am I? And I think that's something that we need to take into account. Right. If we feel like we're in an abusive relationship, but we don't know, we have no idea, what can we do?
Well, you can call our 24-hour hotline, and we have crisis managers that will meet with people on a face-to-face individual basis, and we can go through, ask some questions, just do some kind of assessment, and help the person know where they are.
That's great. And the hotline's on the screen right now, so you might want to jot that down. And if they have any questions, like for some reason, well, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells, but this really can't be abuse, they can talk to the hotline.
Absolutely. And they can call the hotline for any issue, any question they have, and it will be regarded as confidential and treated sincerely.
Okay. I'd like to thank my guest again for being with us, Sandra K. Patton, Executive Director of the Family Violence Center, Inc., or INC, period. And I'd like to thank you for joining us here on This Gay Life. If you have any problems, or if you think you might have a problem, please don't hesitate to call. And if you happen to be underage, please, if you have a problem, get some help. There's lots of agencies out there. Thank you for joining us on This Gay Life. I'm Cruz Devon.